Hello everyone and welcome to my presentation. My name is Đức Lê and I am an electrical engineering student at RIT. For the past 1 year, I've been working on this project about robust L1-norm singular value decomposition as a member of the Panos lab at RIT and under the guidance of my advisor, Professor Markopoulos. Let's begin by talking about the problem of principal component analysis as well as singular value decomposition under the more conventional and popular L2 norm. If you are given a data matrix X with dimension D and the number of data points N, to find the principal component is to find a subspace Q containing k d by 1 vectors, where the ith vector would be in the direction of best fit, while still being orthogonal to the previous I-1 principal component. And best fit in this context is to minimize the sum of square of the errors or residues between the approximated matrix and the original matrix, hence the name L2 norm. So for if a D is 2, then to find the first principal component is simply to find the line of best fit through this 2D data set. To mathematically formulate the problem of L2 PCA, there are three ways. The first is to minimize the low rank error. The second is to minimize the error between the original dataset and the projection of it onto the subspace of the principal components. And the third is to maximize the projection of that dataset onto the subspace of the principal components. And under the L2 norm, these three problems are equivalent. A problem that is closely related to the problem of L2 PCA is the L2 singular value decomposition problem. This decomposition is unique and it decomposes the matrix X into three matrices. The first is the left singular vectors U, which is orthonormal. The second is a diagonal matrix sigma that contains the singular values on its diagonal elements. And the third one is the right singular vectors V. This decomposition has a lot of interesting properties, one of which is the relationship to L2 PCA, which states that the k dominant singular vectors in U would also be the first k principal components. So both of these problems of L2 SVD and L2 PCA are ubiquitous in science and engineering applications, but the only problem with them is that they are based on the L2 norm, which, because of their square emphasis on the error, will promote abnormal data points such as outliers. So that is why we are going to try to reformulate these two problems using an L1 norm version instead. So the L1 norm means that we are only going to sum the absolute values, which will definitely damp down the effect of extreme data points. So here are the different applications where singular values estimation is important, such as channel capacity estimation in communication, electromyography signal analysis, and other image processing applications. So we believe that if we can develop an outlier resistant singular value estimation, it will find great use in science and engineering. Let's move on to the L1 PCA problems. So the first thing is that there are many differences between the L1 PCA and the L2 PCA problems. The first one is the scalability property. So for L2 PCA, the principal components themselves are independent from the number of principal components to be collected, whereas it's no longer the case for L1 PCA. The second thing is the projection of the data matrix X onto the optimal subspace of the principal components is orthogonal in L2 PCA, but it's no longer orthogonal in L1 PCA. And the three formulations of the PCA problem shown in the previous slide are equivalent for L2 PCA, whereas they are no longer equivalent for L1 PCA. L1 PCA also has a higher computational time, but that is the trade-off for the ability to suppress outliers. There have been a lot of past achievements on tackling the L1 PCA problem done by Professor Markopoulos and his collaborators. the most important of which is the one in 2017, where a bit-flip algorithm is developed to solve the maximizing L1 projection problem. The algorithm is a suboptimal one, meaning the solution will not be optimal, but the trade-off is that it has a very low computational time. And because of that, the algorithm would be the starting point for this project. So note that these algorithms are solving the principal component analysis problems, whereas the main goal of this research is to find a L1 based method for singular value decomposition. Let's move on to the main focus of this research, which is L1 singular value decomposition. So our proposed L1 SVD formulation is still largely the same to the L2-norm counterpart, which decomposes X into U, sigma, and V. However, this decomposition is no longer exact because the exact solution would be L2 SVD because of its uniqueness property. The left singular vectors U, which is still orthonormal, is chosen to be the solution of L1 PCA found using the bit-flip algorithm. However, because of this property of L1 PCA, the projection of X onto the left singular vectors U is no longer orthogonal, so we transform the problem to an optimization problem where we aim to find a diagonal sigma and orthonormal V whose product is the closest to U transpose X. In light of that, we are proposing our first algorithm, which tries to find sigma and V in an alternative fashion. So what is known here is the original data matrix X, along with the left singular vectors U, UL1 found using the bit-flip algorithm. So the alternating algorithm means that we are going to fix sigma and try to find V using the Procrustes problem, and then we fix V and try to find sigma. This algorithm is performing very well, but the only problem is that it is dependent on a solution of a previous algorithm. As a result, we propose the second algorithm, which tries to find all three matrices U, sigma, and V of the decomposition concurrently. There's been some algorithms that solves the problem of L1 principal component analysis in an alternative fashion, and we are going to take advantage of it by putting that algorithm into our loop. So that is to find U, and then we use the same method as the first proposed algorithm to find the two other vectors, sigma and V. Now that we have two proposed algorithms to solve the L1 SVD problem, let us do a numerical experiment to compare the performance of those two algorithms to the two baseline algorithms of the conventional L2 SVD as well as an SVD that is based on the L1 bit-flip algorithm. But first, let's discuss the signal model being used in this experiment. The model contains the clean data matrix X, clean, to be compared to, and it has a subspace structure, meaning it is low rank. It is first corrupted with a noise, a slight noise N, and an outlier O. The outlier will be applied randomly on one out of 10 data points, and the strength of the outlier, formulated as the outlier to signal ratio OSR, will be varied to see the performance at different strengths of outliers, and the distribution of the outlier will be in a predetermined subspace. The first metric that we are going to look at is the preservation of singular values. So how well do each SVD problems preserve the singular values of the corrupted matrix compared to the singular values of the clean matrix when they're outliers. So the answer here is pretty clear. This metric, this error would be smaller for our two proposed algorithms, the red and the blue lines here, compared to the two baseline algorithm after a certain strength of OSR at around 5. And then there are two different types of singular values that we are also going to look at. The first is the dominant singular values of the first singular value, and the second is the subdominant singular values of the rest of the singular values. So our two proposed algorithms perform very well in preserving the dominant singular value, whereas it is no longer the case for the rest of the singular values. However, the strength of the dominant singular value for the most part is much more than the rest of the singular values. So in general, for all of the singular values, our two proposed algorithms still perform better than the baseline algorithms. And another metric that people look at when evaluating different singular values decomposition is how well does it low rank approximate the clean matrix. And it turns out that after a certain outlier strength, our two algorithms also perform better than the baseline algorithms. However, this crossover point happens later than the one for singular value preservation, because our algorithms are not actively trying to minimize this low rank approximation error. And to move on to the timing analysis, the proposed algorithm 2, which is the direct alternating algorithm, is much faster than the proposed algorithm 1. In fact, it is much faster than any algorithms that are dependent on the L1 bifid algorithm. Although, as we saw before, the proposed algorithm 1 and 2 have basically the same performance. So, in conclusions, we have developed two L1 SVD algorithms which better preserve both the singular values as well as the low rank estimation compared to the conventional L2 SVD when the dataset is corrupted with outliers. And they do that with an acceptable computational time. So we expect to see this algorithm to find use in science and engineering applications where singular values estimation is of great importance. And I would like to thank my advisor, Professor Markopoulos, and the fellow members of the Milos Lab, along with our sponsor for the Milos Lab. And thank you for listening to my presentation, and I would welcome any questions to this email address here.